And welcome back to the Verde Valley Experience. We are now out here on the porch of the Surgeon's Quarters at Fort Verde State Historic Park with our favorite reenactor, Bob Erb, who is the hospital steward here at Fort Verde.
That's correct.
That is correct. Tell us what the hospital steward would do.
Okay, the hospital steward is really an enlisted man that would be recruited to become the assistant, you might say, to the post surgeon. And so it's a person kind of acting like what we think of maybe as a nurse today, but probably had even a larger role than that back in those days.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you would be the assistant to the surgeon, so
Yes.
you're the everything.
I'm the everything.
He gets all the credit and you do all the work.
That's right.
That's right.
So,
You have the most amazing display of instruments of torture I've ever seen.
okay, yes.
Explain a little bit about what's going on here, because it looks like you could cover every eventuality here.
Well, pretty much, yes. This is a display that represents the types of surgical tools and other kinds of things that doctors and surgeons would have used during that period, during the the Fort Verde days of the 1870s and the 1880s, but really the same stuff that they would have used during the American Civil War in the 1860s. And for most of it actually goes back into the Revolutionary War and even before that as well, because medicine moved very slowly back in those particular days. But to give you an idea of how medicine has improved, if we look at the American Civil War in the 1860s, if a soldier got shot in the abdomen, the belly area, 87% of those soldiers died from that wound because they had no idea of germs of that time, things getting infected. They didn't really know how to do internal surgery. So 87%. But if we look at that same wound and we move forward to the 1940s into the World War II period, for the same wound, we're now looking at 4% that are dying instead of the 87.
Big difference.
If we go another 20 years into the 1960s to the Vietnam conflict, we're looking at 1%.
Wow.
So it's hard to get much better than that.
Yeah.
Same thing if you had a chest wound back in those days. 62% of those people died of a chest wound, again for the same reasons, not knowing how to do the internal surgery, etc. Now here at Fort Verde, there was a lot of different things that would have happened to the soldiers. And to give you an idea of one thing, let's say a soldier had a toothache, and he would come up here to see the surgeon. But the thing to keep in mind is that during this period of time, very few surgeons were actually trained in dentistry.
Oh.
So it was kind of on-the-job learning, that sort of thing. Okay, so the soldier comes up, and what they're going to probably do is lay him on his back on the floor. The surgeon's going to straddle the chest. Actually, quite often, the hospital stewards did this. Oh. So it could be me, but I'm sitting on the person's chest. If we've got chloroform, we would administer chloroform to put them under. Okay.
That would be nice of you.
That would be good. Then the first thing that we would take is what was called, it's a goat's foot. It's a dental tool. It's got hooks on it. But you would go into the mouth and, of course, try to pry that tooth loose and if possible, maybe even bring it out with this.
Ow.
If not, you had another tool that was used, which was called a tooth key. And the tooth key is wrapped around the top of the tooth. So let's say my finger is the tooth. If I wrap this around the top of the tooth and I begin to turn, if I can get that to stay on there, but what I'm doing is I'm rotating the tooth up and out.
Right.
Now, if I'm lucky, maybe I don't even have to do that. And I can go in just with what was called a tooth forceps and use this to pull the tooth out. Now, quite often, when you're doing all of this, it was not uncommon for the tooth to break off at the root. If that happened, then we got more of a problem than when you first came in. So this here is what was called a root extractor, which is really nothing more than what you would buy today in any hardware store. It's got a little screw on it. But this would go up into the root canal. You would screw this into the root itself with the idea that you would pull it out.
Right.
Although, unfortunately, I guess quite often these didn't work. And I think a lot of people probably walked around with the root still in their mouth.
Oh my gosh. Speaking of walking around with stuff in your mouth, and well, stuff in you at all. I mean, we've got bullets to worry about, we've got arrows to worry about.
Right. If a soldier was shot with an arrow, I think I'd rather get shot with a bullet than an arrow. But if you were shot with an arrow, you had about a half hour, within the first half hour to get this out. If you didn't, the chances of that arrow staying in you for good is quite possible.
Wow.
And the reason being is that your body gives off heat.
Yes.
Okay, so this is inside your body, it's warm, and the sinews that animal tendons that the Indians would use to wrap around the shaft to help to hold the arrowhead in, and plus the glues that are used to help hold it in the shaft, all of that begins to loosen up and melt. So that if you were to pull on this, and this were to separate from the shaft, well, you got a problem, because this here, the shaft, can help you maybe push it all the way through if you had to.
Right.
But it takes you down, it shows you where the arrow is. Let's say the arrow is embedded in soft tissue, it's not stuck in a bone. You would go in with just a twisted wire like this. You would follow the shaft down, and when you got to the point of the arrow, this would go onto the point, and then you would pull this way, and of course the wire keeps this onto the shaft.
Right.
Now let's say this is stuck in a bone. Well, we can't put it over the tip because it's stuck in a bone. So then we'll take a device like this. It's a tube that's got a wire in it, but the wire now goes over the top of the shaft. You work down to where the point is. You get down there, and once you get down, you tighten up this around it, and then you pull it out this way.
Sure.
But the other thing that made these difficult is that quite often rattlesnake venom was put on there, or also you know, parts of their liver and things of that thing that would also have a poison. So
dear.
The arrow was a pretty tough thing to deal with.
Oh my gosh. And bullets were probably the most common wound.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say the most common.
Then again, they go around shooting each other.
In the Civil War, you could say that, but here, let's say at Fort Verde, if a soldier got shot with a ball, one, you hope they didn't hit the bone, because if it hit the bone, it would shatter the bone, then you're looking at amputation. But let's say you're hit by a ball or a bullet, and it's in soft tissue. What you would do is that they would take what was called a bullet probe, just a iron rod, but the iron rod would go down into the wound, because what you're trying to do is that you're trying to find the bullet. Now, if they didn't have one of these, they would use their fingers, which was worse because that created more internal bleeding and also germs, etc.
Right.
But we used the probe, we found the ball, so then the next tool we might use is what was called a ball extractor, and actually these were used all the way through World War I. This would go down in the wound where that bullet is, and this is a screw. If this can be placed then near that ball, now let's say the ball or the bullet is maybe up against a bone, that helps because you got something to push against. Then you just start screwing it, and then once you've screwed this into the bullet, you're able to retrieve it.
Wow.
Or if you're lucky, you don't even need to use that. You can just go in with a ball forceps or a bullet forceps and pull it out.
Bob, you're amazing. Your knowledge is incredible, and I know you could go on for another 30 minutes. We haven't even touched amputation yet, or any of the other really gory stuff that might make you want to faint. So if you have any interest of this, you can always stop by Fort Verde State Historic Park, especially during the history of the soldier time when they're going through all of this stuff and it's out and about. And next time you think of complaining about your health care, remember this stuff, and you don't think it's that bad. So. Bob Erb, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we'll be right back, so don't go away.